Tonight on this week's The Catch.
Hold on!
Fishermen are a breed apart.
And so are the This Week team.
It's very much a Marmite job.
But who's got the sea legs to stomach a stormy Westminster week?
I question my sanity sometimes.
Miranda Green's gone fishing.
Morris has been acting like a pufferfish this week. Not for the first time. I hope I don't catch one of those.
Skipper Jamie Bartlett wonders if technology is drowning out the democratic process.
It's been a stormy week for Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. People say something fishy's going on.
And comedian Simon Evans hopes to find his sea legs.
I'm outraged at these titles. They're a load of old codswallop.
This one's alive!
Don't worry, I've got it.
Hold on to anything you can hold on to, because we're full steam ahead and it's Gale Force 10 on tonight's This Week. We're a great catch. Evening all, welcome to This Week. And wasn't that a nail-biter of an election in Russia last Sunday? I'm sure, like me, you stayed up all night as the results poured in from the likes of Vladivostok Central and St. Petersburg in the Wold, each declaration only making it more of a knife edge. In the wee small hours, victory eventually went to rank outsider V.V. Putin of the dirty Bloodsuckers Party. But he snuck in with only 77% of the vote. It's a far cry from the bad old Soviet days when winners could expect 99%. It shows just what a hard-fought contest it was. The excitement has been too much for some British politicians. Dear Jezza was so taken by the result that he demanded we send Moscow a sample of the Russian nerve agent used in the Salisbury assassination attempt. Now, since the Russians developed this agent in secret and then, when they were rumbled, claimed that they had destroyed it all, I doubt they're not going to put up their hands and say, hey, it is ours. Thanks for returning it to its rightful owner. But it shows the Labour leader's generosity of spirit. The same cannot be said for Foreign Secretary Bojo, who's been such a sore loser that he's claiming the upcoming World Cup in Russia will be reminiscent of Hitler's 1936 Olympic Games. Now, sensible folk avoid Nazi analogies, and those who deploy them usually come to regret it. That's doubly true, I'd suggest, when the target is a nation that lost 25 million lives in the war against the Nazis, and without whose sacrifice Hitler would likely have been invincible. There's a difference between a journalist dashing off a glib column, which mixes some big words with a few obscure Latin phrases, and being the head of Her Majesty's Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It's a difference not yet grasped by the current incumbent. Speaking of those whose knowledge of history is as good as their grasp of reality, I'm joined on the sofa tonight by two former politicians who couldn't tell their Stalins from their Churchills and who think FDR is a highway in New York. I speak, of course, of Michael #Choo-Choo Patillo and Alan #SadMan on the left, Johnson. Welcome to you both. Your moment, Michael, of the week.
It's not often that an interviewer on radio or television approaches a politician with a tone of respect in his voice. And this morning, John Humphrys approached Tobias Ellwood with something like awe. Tobias Ellwood was the Member of Parliament minister who a year ago today, hearing the sound of gunfire in the Palace of Westminster, rushed towards the gunfire and tried to resuscitate the dying policeman who had been stabbed by the terrorist who had already caused the death of 5 people on Westminster Bridge. That was all a year ago today. And the sacrifice of the police officer, the willingness of Tobias Ellwood to run towards danger, I think just does remind us that there are people who are very, very brave in these situations, and we need them because obviously terror is something that we will see again. But it was a solemn day today, properly commemorated a very sad day a year ago.
Alan, your moment.
Well, as you alluded to, I've been wrong about most things in politics. I came to the conclusion this week that I was wrong about Theresa May. I thought she'd be gone by last Christmas. I've said she's toast over and over again, and that her fate is no longer in her hands. It will be the Tory party that decides. Kind of this week, she's had a particularly good week. I think not only that she can survive, but that she will decide when she goes. And as well as that, I thought she was wrong to put Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary and David Davis as Brexit Secretary. But the way things have panned out, they're probably two of her most ruthless opponents if she was going to be displaced. And her decision to place them in those positions now looks more sensible than it did at the time. So I've changed my view, which means she'll probably go.
I was going to say, she will be toast by the morning.
Yes, that's true.
My moment of the week, which I have this week, was just a couple of hours ago. And that is that the trade wars have now started in earnest, with Donald Trump announcing $60 billion of tariffs against China. And trade wars can lead to wars. Trade wars can certainly lead to recession, as they did in the 1930s. And I would suggest that the United Kingdom and the Eurozone currently need a recession like a hole in the head. And that, I think, is really serious.
Yeah.
Now, these are scary times. You don't really know what's going to get you first, the Novichok or the cyber attack or Boris's vocabulary. And if you try to research the dangers online, then your every digital step is tracked by the likes of Facebook and Google, who hoover up all your proclivities, then pass the data on to folks selling you everything from marmalade to bread and circuses. The reason so much is apparently free in the digital world is because you are the product. Not a lot of people know that. But more do now after it was revealed that a UK-based company, Cambridge Analytica, was hired by the Trump 2016 campaign to target bespoke messages at millions of American voters based on reams of data about them harvested from Facebook. It was called Project Alamo, and like the old Texan fort, the whole caboodle could be about to crumble. Politicians are baying for Facebook's blood. So is old media, which of course has lost so much ad revenue to the likes of Facebook. Folks are deleting Facebook from their mobiles. Left-wing activist Paul Mason has even called for Facebook to be taken under state ownership, leading one wit to accuse him of wanting to nationalise the memes of production. But is it really such a scandal? Is it not just sophisticated selling for the digital age? Is it any different from what the Obama campaign did in 2008 and again in 2012, or Hillary Clinton in 2016, or the Leave campaign in 2016, or Labour in 2017? Jamie Bartlett is a journalist who knows a lot about digital technology. This is his take of the week.
People are right to be horrified by the antics of Cambridge Analytica, but contrary to what Mark Zuckerberg would have you believe, their behaviour is neither new nor unique. Political data mining really found its feet with Barack Obama back in 2008, and it got into its stride with Trump and Brexit. Don't forget, Hillary Clinton used it too. Everyone's at it. And when data mining really learns to run, it could undermine democracies the world over.
I program my own computer.
Outrage has focused on the assault on social media users' privacy. But for the most part, Cambridge Analytica were only using social media in the way the big tech firms designed them to be used. Free services in exchange for your data. Facebook likes have always been harvested and analysed to identify your emotional vulnerabilities and then exploit them to nudge you into buying a pair of trainers or a holiday. So why can't the same techniques be used to recruit you to a particular political cause? Wave after wave of data collection, analysis and targeting harms our democracy because it means we're subject to subtle forms of manipulation and control. And the data dons have discovered something even scarier. Emotive and divisive language and images outperform dry, rational arguments. That encourages us to vote according to our most basic, often irrational prejudices. It's the digital age's equivalent of old-fashioned populism, and we know from the experience of the last century what lies at the bottom of that slippery slope. This is the tragic irony of the age of big tech. It was once assumed that the internet would make politics hyper-rational, that people would make informed decisions on the basis of an abundance of information. But the opposite has happened. We're constantly distracted, addicted, manipulated, and angry. But the worst is yet to come. Mark Zuckerberg hasn't reacted to the Cambridge Analytica scandal by promising to stop data harvesting, he's just promised to do it better. But when artificial intelligence really gets into its stride, our democracies will be undermined in new and unexpectedly sophisticated ways. We need to act now before it's too late.
And our thanks to the National Museum of Computing at Bletchley. Jamie Bartlett joins us now. So digital campaigning attempts to pull at people's heartstrings. What's new about that?
Well, nothing to do about that. That's what politics has always been about. But this is like a combination of using emotive messages, but on a massive scale and in a way that is so perfectly targeted at individual users, to individuals, which, you know, that creates all sorts of other problems. Like it can be very difficult for regulators or even other people to know what each of us is receiving. And if we have a perfectly tailored and targeted message directed at our inner thoughts and feelings, but nobody else sees it, it's very hard for us to engage, I suppose, in this broader public debate. We just have millions of private little debates.
You're saying it atomises politics?
I think it does atomise politics, and that really worries me because the only reason public debate works is if everyone roughly understands what everybody else is receiving and talking about. And if you fundamentally change that, then really you're changing completely the way that politics works.
Is this a legitimate concern, Michael?
Could I first of all say I think that's one of the most articulate films we've ever had. I think that was a model film. I learned a lot from it. I actually don't know whether to be concerned. The bit of Jamie's film that really worried me was when he talked about appealing to very base instincts. So let's say to racism or to radicalism, phobias of various kinds. And as you say, going on in secret, this could be very, very worrying. I really don't know whether we have the means to regulate any of that stuff. What may work with Facebook at the moment, what's made them come out and make some statements at last after days of being enclosed in their bunker, was the fact that the share price was falling. So that, you know, that's the kind of thing that matters to Facebook. I don't know whether this is going to open up a new era where governments, in a concerted way, get to grips with these giants, or whether this is like railing against wireless and television early in the 20th century. You know, whether people will look back on your film in 30 years' time and think that it's kind of antique and extraordinary that we ever took the view that we could regulate this thing.
I'll get Jamie to respond to that in a minute, but first of all, Alan, are you concerned?
Well, I think the reason why Michael said that was a really good film and we learnt a lot is because we probably didn't know a lot about social media before. And I remember a few years ago with people telling politicians you have to get up with the new way of communicating with people. The old way, by the way, we used to knock on a door, Michael would have done this, with a sheet of paper. We used to ask people how they intended to vote, how their family intended to vote, and whether they've got any concerns. And local councillors, politicians would kind of scribble down their concerns were about the local roads or whatever and try and act upon it. Now, this looks to be that kind of thing, writ large, using something which was there to sell a product. And it was inevitable it was going to be politics.
But you're saying it's playing more on emotion rather than repairing the roads.
Yeah, partly. And imagine in the future if politics becomes more and more about having sophisticated software that knows exactly how to pull on each person's heartstrings and not the basis of discussion that politicians have on the doorstep. I think that's a very different type of politics, and it will turn people off. And hopefully, given it's such a great video, people will be watching in 30 years' time, taking lessons
About
from it.
7 will be watching us tonight.
It'll be in the archive. 7 million's a bit high. You should
But I think this is exactly the big discussion, the big debate of our time. It's between technology, essentially, and politics.
But is there any evidence that Cambridge Analytica had any impact on the 2016 campaign?
Yes, well, this is a great question because some of the recent reports about it have actually been essentially about legality of data collection and not really whether it made an impact, because that's very hard to determine.
It is hard to measure.
And there is a bit of wizardry of Oz about all of this. That's certainly true. It's good for business to say, yeah, we won it, we swung the election with our sophisticated tools and techniques. But you know what? I mean, I have a book coming out next month about all of this stuff, called The People versus Tech. And I spent a lot of time with people involved in this campaign for that.
So what is the answer?
I think you could say that Cambridge Analytica probably did swing the election. A few weeks into the campaign, Brad Parscale, who was running Trump's digital campaign, received lots of data from Cambridge Analytica suggesting that there were enough persuadable Trump voters in Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that he could win those states. Everyone else said he couldn't. They shifted loads of budget towards that and they won each of them by less than 1 percentage point.
Right, but Hillary Clinton, I mean, they lost Pennsylvania, or Mrs. Clinton did, by 44,000 votes. But Hillary Clinton was using these techniques as well. And there were people in the Clinton campaign told her, Pennsylvania is not a slam dunk. Michigan is not a slam dunk. You need to go there.
Yeah.
And until the final days of the campaign, she refused. That's nothing to do with Cambridge Analytica or any of this technology. That's just a major campaign error of judgment.
You can't turn a very bad candidate into a very good one with these techniques. This is all I think about little...
That's how bad her campaign was.
Not even Cambridge Analytica could have done. But I think it's all about very tiny margins in very close races, and particularly for a candidate like Trump that had very little ground game. They did spend more. I think they spent more on Facebook than Clinton did, $70 million or so. Brad Parscale...
Well, Labour, I think, spent more on Facebook than...
No, the Tories spent more on Facebook.
Oh, they did more on Facebook?
We did more on Twitter.
And Labour spent more on other social media.
Yeah.
But their social media campaign in 2017 was a lot better than the Tories' campaign.
I think it probably was, and it was slightly different. It was a bit more organic. I think they used it far more wisely. It wasn't about the adverts. It was grassroots, and they were kind of encouraging it.
But here's you see, when I see this, because I can see it has sinister potential, but I'm yet to see the impact. And you can't help working. I mean, the fact is, I'll say this to you, Alan, the Liberal establishment hasn't yet recovered from Brexit or Mr. Trump winning. And it needs to think that voters were kind of brainwashed in some way, manipulated in some way to come to these crazy results. That's their
there might be an element of that. I mean, Jamie made the point about Obama. When Obama used it, you didn't hear too much concern about it because Trump won. So I think there is an element of that. And I think the other thing that I'm worried about is what is the regulation? What kind of regulation are we going to introduce? Are we going to kill off something that has a lot of value for people and a lot of potential because of a kind of passing sense of panic associated with Cambridge Analytica?
We don't want to throw it. We don't want to throw it all out. And
but it will be. I mean, it's going to be regulated in some way now, isn't it?
There has to be more regulation. I think that's
right or wrong.
For sure.
That's going to happen.
Yes, and there's the political pressure and there's the public pressure for it. This feels like a bit of a tipping point.
Yes.
Some of that might be down to consumer choices. People talk about nationalising Facebook. That stuff like that's not going to work. But consumers.
It's not going to happen, whether it would work or not.
But consumers.
How is US Congress going to agree to that?
How on earth would it work at all?
And then the government would have all our data, so that would be fine.
Well, yes, but the public pressure. I mean, people can start using different social media platforms, ones that don't trade on our data, and I can well imagine
people can use alternatives to Google to do that now.
They're not quite as good yet, but this is the weird thing. You need people to use them for them to get better. because then they can benefit from network effects. But one thing we really must do that I think is vital with elections is, at the very least, parties will have to show all the targeting techniques they've used, the data collection that they've applied, the messages that they put to different groups, because at the very least then journalists can look at it and sort of keep tabs on what they're doing.
I want to come back though, to Michael, because I think for me the most interesting point Jamie made was that politics traditionally has been politicians make broad offers to the public, and they make them in public, and we all get to judge in our own way whether that's the offer we want or whether we want someone else's offer. What Jamie's saying though is that what's happening now is that the parties or politicians are making tiny bespoke offers to individuals, often based in emotion rather than on economic value. That's really interesting, is it not?
It is interesting, and I think it's worse than that, because as far as I can understand, it's not just an offer. It may be that they want to exacerbate your prejudice.
Yes.
It may be that you have a phobia and they want to make that phobia worse. It may be that they want to just put you off a candidate or make you believe that a particular anger that you're feeling is an anger that's shared by a candidate. So all of that is pretty unhealthy stuff.
Yes.
I think I agree that it's probably a tipping point. I mean, Jamie has said today that this is now the lead issue of our generation. I think more people are going to believe that this evening than had believed it before. I mentioned the share price before. Why is the share price sinking? Why has it sunk so much? Because clearly the market thinks that regulation is coming.
Yes.
And the market generally gets that.
And that some consumers will vote with their feet, as they are.
Yeah, and a consumer can choose to pay for digital media and then not have to pay through having their data sequestered.
Right. We'll have to leave there. Give me the name of the book again, James.
It's called, thank you, it's called The People versus Tech. We've actually pulled it forward a few weeks because it feels like it's trying to explain this issue.
You've got to be on time.
Absolutely.
This is
highly micro-targeted
seize
book.
the time, as the famous activist.
This channel didn't used to have advertising.
Jamie, thank you very much. They advertised his jackets for years. It's late. The war over Jezza's hat late. Not since Pitt the Younger's hat tax of 1784 has headgear caused such a political ding-dong. Enraged Corbynistas accused Newsnight of all programmes, enhancing his fetching trademark cap to make him look like a Soviet stooge. Perish the thought. It's a Greek fisherman's cap, said some. No, it's a Breton mariner's cap, claimed others. It's just like the one John Lennon used to wear, shouted some children of the 60s. But it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the one that other Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, was fond of wearing. They all agreed on that. Newsnight denied that it had doctored anything to give Jezza a Leninist demeanour, and Channel 4 News Fact Check agreed but that didn't quiet the howls of anguish. They'll still be going come the next full moon. Someone who knows nothing about hats, but a thing or two about offence, manufactured or otherwise, is comedian Simon Evans, who's putting outrage in the spotlight. And if you still feel the need to send us your untutored thoughts on the Twitter, Snap Numpty, or heaven forbid, the Fleecebook, my strong advice is cut out the middleman. Just send them all to Mark Zuckerberg. Now, a fishing boat steamed up the Thames yesterday and dumped some dead fish overboard in sight of Parliament. It was either a work of performance art or a protest against the government's decision to stay in the EU's common fisheries policy during our transition to Brexit. On the one hand, there was no sign of Captain Birdseye, advertising again, which suggests it was art. On the other hand, it involved Nigel Sealegs Farage and Jacob Moby Mogg, which indicates it could have been something to do with Brexit. Bravely sailing downwind of it all was our own intrepid fishy person, Miranda Green. This is our roundup of the week.
Every time we do this, I have to fight off ridiculous suggestions from the This Week team. I did tell them I'm no fish thrower, but it seems I've been sent off to catch Andrew and Molly's dinner. It's scraping the barrel, but at least I'll be out in the fresh air. It's a bit whiffy in here. Or is that Michael's cologne? Hope he hasn't left his tackle anywhere around. spot. I hope I get a bite, but patience is a virtue. On Monday, after lengthy negotiations, the UK and the EU revealed the draft transition deal for Brexit, 21 months. David Davis gave the appearance of having landed a big catch.
Businesses need not delay investment decisions or rush through contingency plans based on guesses about the future deal. Instead, they now have certainty about the terms that will apply immediately after our withdrawal.
Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
Some of the waters are still murky. The Northern Ireland border spawns anxiety on all sides. One issue important to the Brexiters did get away. The UK will not regain control of its fishing waters until after transition. Michael Gove described this result as suboptimal, and he was then baited by the SNP.
Can I just say, what a load of codswallop from a Secretary of State who's all out at sea on this issue.
Isn't it time that he and his Scottish Tory sprats were also discarded?
Never before has the phrase "done up like a kipper" seemed more appropriate as they experience once again the United Kingdom government betraying Scottish fishing communities.
I've got a jerk on the line. Nigel Farage accused the government of lacking guts, and protesters hired a trawler to take their case up the Thames to the Commons. But not all the Eurosceptics were of the same school of thought. Ugh!
Am I going to change my name to Captain Haddock? I'm not throwing fish anywhere. I am not a fish thrower. I think this has got slightly out of hand.
Very fishy. And the diplomatic rift between the UK and Russia hasn't healed. While Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Trump congratulated President Putin on his re-election, the UK upped the ante. Theresa May asked other EU leaders for a united front.
I'll be raising this issue with my counterparts today because it's clear that the Russian threat does not respect borders, and indeed the incident in Salisbury was part of a pattern of Russian aggression against Europe and its near neighbours.
Boris Johnson agreed at a select committee hearing that President Putin was likely to use the World Cup in the way that Hitler had used the 1936 Olympics.
I think the comparison with 1936 is certainly right, and I think it's an emetic prospect, frankly, for to think of Putin glorying in this sporting event.
Nobody has the right to insult the Russian people who defeated Nazism and lost more than 25 million people by comparing our country to Nazi Germany.
But John McDonnell, the Labour Shadow Chancellor, also took a tough line.
I agree completely with the Prime Minister. What she said is that Russia is culpable either by direct commission, either Putin's ordered this, or they've lost control of their supplies. He is responsible. Whichever way you look at it, he is responsible, and all the evidence points to him.
So hats off to John McDonnell. Oh, it is getting chilly. As for the Labour leader, his position's a bit more nuanced.
Yes, would I do business with Putin? Sure. And I would challenge him on human rights in Russia, challenge him on these issues, and challenge him on that whole basis of that relationship. You have to deal with people who are in the position they are as head of state.
Slippery? Well, jelly deal is my favourite. This week, Mr Corbyn landed his own choice as Labour's new General Secretary. Some dismayed staffers left. At PMQs, he cast his net towards the local elections only a few weeks away, highlighting the collapse of Conservative Northamptonshire County Council.
Now, that council has gone bust. Yep. Does the Prime Minister really believe that the slash and burn model for local government is really a good one?
After a weak start, Mrs May waded in.
Yesterday, 2 Labour councillors from Ashfield District Council joined the Conservatives. They said, both locally and nationally, the Labour Party has been taken over by the hard left, who are more interested in fighting internal ideological battles than standing up for the priorities of working men and women.
Ooh, I think I've got one. The Health Secretary hailed some good news for NHS workers, with a 6.5% pay rise across 3 years and more for the lowest paid. Not everyone went for it hook, line and sinker.
Today's agreement on a new pay deal reflects public appreciation for just how much they have done and continue to do. Rarely has a pay rise been so well deserved for NHS staff who have never worked harder.
I think the devil is in the detail, and our members that met yesterday were absolutely going through the details and couldn't see how this was going to claw back years of pay cuts.
Finally a catch! And what a beauty! It reminds me of someone. Andrew, back to you.
A special thanks to the Albury Estate Fisheries. They might just get one of Miranda's fish pies in the post. We apologise for that in advance. Miranda's here. Welcome back. Michael, step back from the detail of what's the likely transition deal at the moment. Is it not now clear whether you're for or against it, that a deal is going to be done on Brexit?
Precisely. I think sort of quietly and unnoticed by many people, there's been a huge leap forward. I think we're now in a position where people aren't talking about a second referendum anymore. I think more and more broadly it's accepted that Brexit is going to happen. We've got 2 stages of the thing done. The money got through without the Conservative Party panicking. Although there's been a lot of noise about fish this week, it's really about coming out of the common fisheries policy fairly and squarely at the end of the transition period. I think there's a widespread feeling that somehow the Irish thing is going to get sorted out, and Gibraltar too. So, what appeared quite recently to be a kind of impossibility to many people, I must say not to me, but what appeared to be widely an impossibility, is now, in the European term, an acquis. In other words, it's pretty much been delivered, it's there.
Do you think Remainers, reluctantly, sadly, maybe even angrily, do you think they now accept that it is going to happen? And that if it does happen, it cannot be reversed easily? I mean, imagine we leave, but a Remain government's elected and it goes back to Brussels and says, we'd like to join, but we're not joining the euro, we're not joining Schengen, and by the way, we'd still like the rebate we used to have. It's not going to happen, is it?
Well, that would be very difficult because you're quite right. The rest of the EU would have enormous difficulties with letting us back in on the very good terms
that we enjoyed.
Have currently enjoyed with all those opt-outs that you mention. I don't know about Remainers accepting it. I think, just as Michael said, it has a momentum of its own and decisions are being taken which make it more inevitable. I mean, for example, having this transition agreement, although, Barnier is always very careful to say nothing's agreed until everything's agreed.
And that's right.
But, even the day after, we've had, the European banks being advised not to stop their preparations for leaving. So all sorts of things are happening that make it more inevitable, but not necessarily make it any more desirable than Remainers thought it would be.
I understand that. That's
it's still, in my view, for example, a disaster, even if it becomes an inevitable disaster.
Alan, don't you get the impression now that what has changed, or the mood, is that the Europeans just kind of want to get on with it now as well?
Look, what's happened is that Theresa May's red lines disappeared. If you look at what's happening, no one talks about crashing out on WTO terms anymore. No one talks about not giving a penny to Brussels. No one talks about not allowing free movement during the transition period. Of course, it was always going to be the case that if you extend Article 50, you do it on the basis of all the rules now.
No one talks that the sum to leave would be 100 billion. Which some did.
Some
it
did.
Turned out to be 37. No one now says that we won't be able to do free trade deals during the transition because you can.
Yeah. Well,
so there's plenty of red lines have been broken.
No. But in terms of what David Davis has achieved from Barnier, Barnier is more satisfied than David Davis. Yes, we can go and do trade deals. We have to do 750 of them with other countries just to replace our deals through the EU. So, of course, they're relaxed about us doing that. The simple fact is, the more you look at this, the more we're heading towards a soft Brexit. And that was the big issue last year, hard Brexit or soft Brexit, not so much leave or remain.
But will it be that soft? We won't be in the single market as members, and we won't be in the custom union. I thought a soft Brexit was that we would still have an element of both, or at least one of the two of these.
That's absolutely right, Andrew, but we haven't sorted out Northern Ireland yet. Is that
the biggest stumbling block?
Well, the incredible thing to me is that deal that was done in December, you couldn't read it any other way in terms of the backstop being that there'd be some kind of customs union on the island of Ireland. Theresa May said no Prime Minister can accept that. The exact same wording has gone into this agreement. So that's going to be the big test of whether, as you rightly say, whether there's going to be some kind of customs union or some kind of European Economic Area deal somewhere down the line. That's still possible with where they are now.
But, sorry, I was just going to say, but also, as you pointed out earlier, you know, if we're now into a world situation which looks more frightening, with trade wars starting up all over the place, Trump looks increasingly unreliable as an economic ally. Actually going for some softer, closer arrangement with the EU will start to look much more attractive to all Britons, I think, and quite rightly so, because it's the sensible thing to go for economically.
If the trade wars lead to a recession, the nature of the deal will be irrelevant, because the political impact of recession in this country and in the rest of Europe will overshadow everything. Are the Corbynistas and Momentum now largely in control of the Labour Party?
Yes. That largely, almost completely.
And it's theirs for the foreseeable future?
Yes. I can't see how it will change. So some very good people left the Labour Party. No one knows their names, but 6 people I knew very well have left, really good people.
Are there any good options for Labour's Social Democrats, like yourself?
No, not so far as I can see. In the sense that, unlike Militant in the early 80s, the hard left have captured the castle. They've got the NEC, they've got the General Secretary's position, they've got...
the leadership?
Yeah, it's just the Parliamentary Labour Party, and there'll be no question whatsoever they'll be working on them. They carried a little rule change this week. Dan Jarvis was going to stand as the mayor for the Sheffield Greater Area.
The South Yorkshire...
made the very reasonable point. I will stay as an MP, because if you're an MP and you take a ministerial job, that's another huge job. But it also gives me the chance to speak in Parliament on behalf of my area, and I'll do it. I won't take a salary for doing the job. They carried an NEC rule change this week, which looks distinctly as if it's just simply to stop Dan Jarvis.
Of course.
Because he's considered to be persona non grata.
If the Lib Dems weren't so ineffective, some in the Labour Party would have an alternative.
I think that's a completely fair comment. And I don't know what's happened to the Lib Dems, really. They just seem to be sort of self-immolating in a sort of anti-Brexit campaign, which isn't offering much hope at the moment to the homeless voters of the centre and centre-left, and even on the centre-right, you know, who are disturbed by Brexit.
Particularly the Remainers on the centre.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of disenfranchised voters at the moment, and the Lib Dems don't seem to be offering them an attractive home.
What did you make of Alan's remarks at the beginning of the programme?
He more or less took the words out of my mouth. I think Theresa May has had 2 good weeks.
Because you didn't think she would survive beyond.
No, I was with Alan. I didn't think she'd make it to the Tory Party conference. But I was also struck. There was a remark last week by Nadine Dorries about some very disobliging remarks she made about Cameron and Osborne, and it reminded me that Cameron and Osborne were 2 characters who create a lot of ructions with the public. See, I don't think Theresa May is particularly up to the job, but she doesn't create the antipathy that her predecessor and George Osborne created. And
is that partly a class thing?
Yes, I think it is partly a class thing, and what political enemies can make out of that class thing. I mean, it's more or less a crime against humanity to be an Etonian in the present political setup.
And your point is?
Cameron and Osborne were probably better at winning elections.
I should point out Mr. Osborne was not at Eton.
No, he was at St Paul's.
And my point is that I think the next election is not about who's leader of the Conservative Party. There are lots of Conservatives who say if we could just change the leader, we win the next election. That is not my view. My view is that the next election is entirely about the leader of the Labour Party. and whether he is electable as our Prime Minister. Now, the problem with this is that you would need a Tory leader who was able throughout the campaign to take the fire to Corbyn, to say you are unsuitable to be our Prime Minister for all sorts of reasons. And from her showing in the last election, she's not the woman capable of doing that.
Which is why she may not still get to fight the next
the logic,
election.
yes.
We shall have to leave it there. Miranda, good to
Thank
see
you.
you again. Go and get the fish on. We'll have
Yeah.
some fish and chips afterwards. We'll have to send out, of course. Outrage has become our biggest growth industry, amplified by social media, which allows us to tell everybody just how outraged we are. Whereas before, all we had was a pot of green ink and some cheap writing paper, usually with lines, with which to nurse our ire. These days, there's nothing you can do or say that will not outrage somebody somewhere. Indeed, millions of folk are congenitally miserable unless they have something to be outraged about. So tonight, we're putting outrage in the spotlight. Times of complex political debate often require a nuanced grasp of difficult ideas and a bit of reasoned inquiry. But who can be bothered with all that when good old-fashioned outrage is much more fun? Is the clandestine world of Russian subterfuge all getting a bit too much? Why not vent at an alleged touched-up picture of Jeremy Corbyn's silly hat?
Yesterday, the background of your programme, you had Jeremy Corbyn dressed up against the Kremlin skyline. No, he's got to make this point.
Make the point.
Dressed up as a Soviet student.
It was a real picture of Jeremy Corbyn.
You even photoshopped his hat to look more Russian.
What about the nuances of European fishing quota negotiations? Nigel Farage provides the level-headed economic analysis we need.
Every day, thornback rays in abundance being chucked back to rot on the seabed. The whole thing is a disaster.
Meanwhile, the US is facing a drug addiction epidemic, and the problem seems intractable. A level head and a subtle legislative mind is called for to tackle the problem.
The ultimate penalty has to be the death penalty. Now, maybe our country's not ready for that. It's possible. It's possible that our country's not ready for that. And I can understand it, maybe. Although, personally, I can't understand that.
Yes, perhaps we've all learned a bit of a lesson about the dangers of letting our outrage at the political establishment help TV personalities get elected to public office.
This year, thousands of women all over America are running for office for the first time. And we're realizing that if we want things to change, we have to do it for ourselves.
At least Quentin Letts saves his outrage to hold politicians to account.
If one of our little dogs gets run over, I'm going to take its dead body and put it on Michael Gove's desk.
Comedian Simon Evans is outraged about outrage. So should we stop letting things get the better of us? And Simon Evans joins us now. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Have we become more prone to outrage, and if so, why?
we is always a wide term, isn't it, there? I think the vast majority of the nation remain relatively sane, but there's definitely manifestations of outrage on social media, which I think is becoming almost an endemic, and it's very easy to fall into. It's very tempting. It's very slippery, that slope, because it just makes the whole experience more exciting. You're in a bit of a dust-up.
Has it encouraged outrage? Because in the past, if you were outraged, you could only tell the person sitting beside you.
Yes.
Now you can tell the world, I'm outraged.
That's right. And in fact, then your outrage becomes directed at the person sitting beside you, who's just alerted you to the fact that you're behaving like a lunatic and your outrage is disproportionate. The number of times my wife says, come to bed, and it's an old joke, but I can't. There's somebody wrong on the internet. You just can't leave it alone. Yeah, and then you become outraged. But don't you see that this is the beginning? This is Orwellian. What is happening here? We all convince ourselves that we're on the brink of it all the time.
And if we now have the ability to tell the world that we're outraged and why, in quieter moments, it may therefore encourage us sometimes to manufacture our outrage.
I don't know that you ever feel that you're manufacturing it. Afterwards, you might look back and be surprised at quite how heated you become. But at the time, it felt perfectly natural, sincere. You felt that you were matching fire with fire. That's the thing. Things elevate, they escalate very quickly. And of course, at that point, if you take some sort of foolish, tomorrow's chip paper type story, but you escalate it to the point where it is a fight for the future of civilization, you're into philosophical territory, which makes it more interesting instead of just balancing the budget,
It wouldn't seem to me that this is, or I'll put it the other way, it seems to me this is going to get worse before it gets better, if it ever gets better.
It's certainly, I mean, I have conversations, the two kinds of conversations I have now on Twitter are of this kind, and then other slightly slower, more rueful expressions of regret that we've allowed Twitter to become like this. But we don't know how to get back.
It's not conducive to a sort of civilised public discourse, is it, though?
I don't know whether, I mean, for me personally, it's never spilled out into anything on the street. I mean, when you re-emerge into Hove, in my case, you're baffled by the quiet countenance of those wandering up and down with their... No, exactly. You just think, am I living in some strange parallel universe?
Anonymity encourages outrage.
Yes, it certainly does. Yes, I have 5 or 6 anonymous accounts as well as my which I can address from different angles.
Do you get outraged about things, Alan?
The less as I get older, I guess. The thing is, but as members of Parliament, you have to deal with outrage. I mean, it was letters in green ink, famously, before the internet. And the way to respond is, of course, always not to be outraged back again and to send very sensible and very... Now, I think that I'd get really worried if that changed, if politicians suddenly thought we have to try and replicate that
sort of match outrage with outrage.
Match outrage. And the other things you mentioned, Orwell. I mean, how do you get to objective truth now when on the internet you can look up any conspiracy theory, whether it's the BBC did that to Corbyn's hat or whatever, and you can find a justification for it somewhere by someone who's got lots of qualifications at the bottom.
And what will always happen is you will find somebody who is expressing your view in a sort of, and it will escalate, or you'll find people who are being sceptical and you go, well, that just proves it.
We've run out of time. What's the thing that's most outraged you in 2 words?
That people are being no-platformed, and they're being no-platformed wherever their appearance could, in the opinion of others, cause outrage. In other words, their meeting could be broken up by thugs. If their meeting could be broken up by thugs, they mustn't be invited. That's really important.
Simon, you on tour?
I am, yes. It's a show called Genius, very humbly. Yes.
That doesn't come to me anyhow. Around the country.
Yes, East Midlands next week, I think, very broadly speaking.
Excellent. Well,
yes.
I'm glad you found time to come and see us tonight.
Thank you very much.
See you.
Pleasure.
And that's your lot for tonight, folks, and for us too, because we've decided to erase our digital footprint by barricading ourselves into Lulu's with the Wi-Fi turned off and our mobile phones disabled. Michael's promised to entertain us with a reading from his favourite railway timetable. And Alan's bringing his acoustic guitar. So I doubt I'll last more than an hour before begging to be released. Nighty-night, don't let Donald Trump show and tell. Bite.
A house with a door. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ready to play? What's the day? It's Thursday.
1. $3 billion. $533 million. 2. $525 million. That's peanuts for you. Should have increased it.
3.
$880 million.
4.
Hercules. Great plane. $3.8 billion.
5.
The Bradley vehicles. That's the tanks. $1.2 billion. And the P-8 Poseidons. $1.4 billion.
It's easier if you hold your fingers down with your thumb at the back.
40,000 jobs.
Time for us to go now. Goodbye.